And we are live. You're listening to Interchain FM, a podcast about all things blockchain interoperability and multi chain. If you're seeking alpha in the cosmos, look no further. I'm your host, Chango Unchained. So today we're here with James Prestwich. Hey, what's up, James?
Hello, Chango.
Can you tell that I'm just a James Prestwich simp? He is a longtime researcher and builder who's been working on solving bridging for the past 5 years. James is the co-founder of Nomad, and he previously worked on a project called Cello. And I'm very excited that he's finally officially working, coming into the Cosmos ecosystem. They just launched their EVMos bridge on
Mhm.
their app yesterday. And so that's really big news. James was one of the original people who, alongside Phil Diane, came up with or I guess observed the idea of MEV before there was the name MEV. So very excited to have you on. And by the way, James is my go-to resource for all things Ethereum questions. So don't tell anyone.
I make a pretty good cheat sheet.
You do. Yeah. So I ask all my ETH2 questions to James. So, James, you're here to talk about Nomad. Why
Hmm.
don't you give us a high level overview of what that is, besides
Yeah,
just being a bridge?
uh, definitely. Nomad is a general purpose cross-chain messaging protocol designed to be cheap, easy to implement, and to kind of be a fast scout for new blockchains. Um, we like Nomad because it is radically simpler than most cross-chain messaging layers. And we've built it with a strong emphasis on easy and secure application development. Some of the initial applications on Nomad are a token bridge, which is live on Ethereum, EVMos, Moonbeam, and a few other places, and a governance application, which we use internally and will be rolling out to a few cool people in the near future. The governance application, kind of answers the question of when you have a DAO on Ethereum and it starts deploying contracts other places, how does it control those contracts using its existing governance system? Obviously, you can't have, the compound governor Bravo or Charlie voting on every chain. You want to vote one place, propagate whatever decision is made to all the other chains for implementation.
And I understand that Nomad doesn't actually have a chain, right? Where does it exist?
Yeah, we think that, if you have two chains, you already have a bunch of problems. And adding a third chain just like, triples up on the problems. So we want to do interoperability without adding an extra chain. We think that's unnecessary, a huge amount of overhead, and a huge amount of complexity. So we just build directly on, each of the individual chains involved. We go directly from Ethereum to EVMos without any intermediary. We have smart contracts on Ethereum, we have smart contracts on EVMos. They talk to each other.
How do you implement that? Is it only for EVM to EVM chains?
Um, it is not only for EVM to EVM chains. Uh, we have the EVM implementation. Excuse me. We have the EVM implementation really nailed down, and we don't have other implementations quite as mature yet. So right now we're only on EVM chains because that's where we're really confident. In the future, we'll get the implementations nailed down in Cosm Wasm and in Nears Wasm and in all the other cool Rust flavors out there and go out to a bunch of different chains. Right now we're prioritizing EVM because it lets us go to a bunch of cool places like EVMos uh, really quickly and with code that we already have a lot of confidence in.
That's perfect. So, how is it designed? As I understand it, uh, you're still leveraging Nakamoto consensus. And so there's not necessarily finality, but probabilistic finality. How is that compatible within the Cosmos / Tendermint scheme where blocks finalize every single block and it doesn't fork. Therefore, it's safety favoring.
Yeah. So what we focus on is providing a better alternative to these multi-sig or validator multi-sig bridges. So we're not currently using anything that's Nakamoto consensus based, except that we have to support Ethereum, which is totally Nakamoto consensus. So the way we do things right now is essentially, rather than giving permission in the multi-sig bridges like Axelar and Wormhole, the owners of the key give permission for messages to be passed. So that means that they can censor messages, they can pass false messages directly. So rather than working based on permission, Nomad works based on revocation. So while there is someone signing these messages and saying that they ought to be sent to the other chain, what keeps Nomad running and secure is the application having the authority to at any point revoke its belief, its trust for this messaging channel. So anytime the message channel is failing, the application can see that and it can revoke its consent. So Nomad keeps the application sovereign and responsible for its trust model, rather than delegating that to an outside validator set like the multi-sig bridges do. Nomad's not intending to provide a competitor to or a replacement for IBC. We honestly prefer the IBC security model in the long run, but IBC isn't available in a lot of places where people want to go. So the way Nomad works is based on revocation. A set of messages is committed to be sent to the other chain, and the people receiving those messages get to choose whether to revoke their trust in the channel, to stop their application from processing those messages before they arrive. You might prevent messages from arriving for lots of reasons. For example, if the channel is faulty and is sending fraudulent messages, you want to shut that down. You might also want to shut down your application if your app itself is faulty. In bridge hacks, they almost always, with one significant exception, result from faulty application code. Bridges are really hard to implement and implement safely. And so when people mess up just the implementation, you lose a few $100 million here and there. We focus a lot on making a really good implementation, but also having safety rails on it, and the ability to shut down the channel if you believe that the application is faulty is one of the best safety rails we can provide.
Yeah, that model kind of reminds me of an expedient, like Plasma exit game model, except Plasma had, like a 7-day revocation period, I believe, which is just very egregious in the DeFi landscape. So, in that context, how is Nomad's design and revocation time period different from other layer twos, for example, like Polygon or the Avalanche bridge?
It's a great question. Usually when we talk about these fraud games or these revocation games, we call it an optimistic system, or for Nomad we call it optimistic-ish. And for any of these systems, the ultimate fallback, the ultimate point of the security model is to prevent fraud from being profitable. And we do that by making it expensive. If you commit fraud, you're guaranteed to be slashed. We do that by reducing the likelihood that you're going to make money by trying to commit fraud. So that's what the revocation is for, is to make it very unlikely that if you attempt to commit fraud, you'll get anything, very unlikely you'll get anything from it. And at the outside edge of this, all optimistic systems, everything with fraud proofs, is predicated on the idea that the community will slash faulty validators. Validators who refuse to include fraud proofs or do things like that. So there's a bunch of different layers at which this game is played. And our argument is that because Nomad fraud is very cut and dry, very objective, it's not like a plasma, it's not like a rollup where there's data availability problems and you have to go back and rebuild the whole thing. Anyone can establish extremely quickly in the Nomad system whether fraud has occurred. And that means that we can cut this latency period to be much shorter than you could on an optimistic rollup or a plasma or something similar. So we have the latency, the revocation period set to something like tens of minutes rather than 7 days.
So, can you explain why users of Nomad don't need to submit fraud proofs the way they would have to using, Optimism or what else?
Yeah.
Other bridges.
In a sense, they do. Is anytime there's attempted fraud, you can submit a fraud proof and cause the person trying to cheat you to get slashed. It's just that those fraud proofs are just stupid simple. It's just like, the correct thing was A and they signed B. Like it takes one signature check and just a couple state lookups and it's really easy. Whereas in Optimism or in Arbitrum, it's very complex. They've nailed it down at this point. They've gotten it to a science, but it is like a complex game played in tens of rounds. Nomad fraud is non-interactive, very simple, cut and dry, one transaction, like 50,000 gas, you're done. Most optimistic systems are played out over 7 days because they require a dozen rounds of back and forth coordination between the challenger and the prover. So yeah, you do have to submit fraud proofs, otherwise nobody gets slashed, but they're just so much simpler in the Nomad model than they are in most optimistic systems.
Why aren't those other systems implementing it in the way that Nomad has?
Well, basically the answer there is that Nomad does a lot less than they do. We get to cheat by really narrowing scope, focusing on the specific message passing application. And Nomad isn't implementing an EVM compatible rollup. We're not implementing like a full chain with a sequencer and everything. We're doing something that is, in comparison, extremely simple. And so proving fraud on a simple system is much simpler. We're not trying to fill that scaling and arbitrary execution niche that optimistic rollups are. So we get to design our system around, the use case we are trying to fill.
Right, for sure. So that's the application specific context of Nomad. Let me ask you this. So tying it back to Cosmos, because we're about to have optimistic rollup like products with Celestia. And I know that their time to market has been just a little bit delayed due to the complexity of state fraud proofs that they need to implement. So, would Celestia be able to, harness the power of Nomad in between their I don't know what it's called, their main chain and their, mini blockchains?
Yeah. So in like the Celestia jargon, Nomad operates at the execution layer. Most bridges like IBC operate between the execution and the consensus layer. So in Celestia, you have this data availability layer, you have this consensus layer, you have this settlement layer, you have this execution layer. Nomad is sticking to bridging between execution layers. We're at a specific part of the Celestia modular stack. Whereas IVC, for example, has to operate on the consensus layer and the execution layer in order to do anybody any good. And that's one of the ways that we are simpler and why we can be a fast scout to new execution layers. We don't have to worry about the complexities of consensus very much. We just have to go execution to execution. So we probably won't be very good for going from Celestia's execution layers down to their consensus or data availability layers. But we will be really great for going between the different execution layers that are built on top of Celestia. The different sovereign rollups that are settling to some chain on top of Celestia, or the different execution environments that are built. We might go between Fuel and Optimism, for example. Less likely to go from the root Celestia data availability layer up to Fuel.
So, with the fact that you guys are working closely with the EVMos team, and the fact that the EVMos team is working closely with the Celestia team, it almost seems like a holy trinity that's about to happen.
We are fortunate enough to have, we are very fortunate to have strong relationships with both of those teams. And we're really excited about being involved in and contributing to their ecosystems going forward.
Perfect. Okay, so let's move the conversation to bridge hacks, because that's what people are concerned with when evaluating whether or not they're going to use a certain bridge. So, obviously the high profile ones would be Wormhole, and the 8 million, Wormhole was something like 300 million, I believe, something just insane. And there's the $8 million Thorchain hack, relatively smaller in comparison, of last summer. So, people like Camilla Rousseau have tweeted that, the fact that there were just really high profile bridge hacks, that multi-chain is dead. Blockchain interoperability is dead. We are going to ultimately rest the fate of the entire crypto industry on one blockchain, and that is Ethereum. What are your thoughts about that?
From the very beginning, the Ethereum roadmap has been to make a bunch of different chains. We just called them shards. What a shard is fundamentally is a different blockchain. And the thing that makes it a shard is that there are many of them under one umbrella. What that means is that there are bridges between all of these different shards. They just happen to run through the same state-sponsored bridging system.
I like that. I'm going to use that. State-sponsored bridging system. That's what you're using when you're using a single L1.
And nowadays, we like rollups. And each rollup, Optimism, Arbitrum, ZK Sync, StarkDex, all of these different, like layer 2 systems are connected to Ethereum by bridges. And within IBC, equipped chains, there are bridges everywhere. The official roadmap of Polkadot is to add XCMP and bridges between all of the parachains, orchestrated by the Polkadot multi-chain system. So I think, given that every major ecosystem has always had a multi-chain roadmap, it seems kind of head in the sand to say that multi-chain is dead or isn't the future. This has explicitly been the goal the entire time ever since the beginning of Ethereum, and that's not changing anytime soon. I don't think the hacks are going to change that, or have even made a significant impact on the market.
Sure, that's kind of like claiming that, the hundreds of millions of dollars that was hacked in the from the DAO hack, the original hack, that's the end of
Yeah.
ICOs, and that's the end
Yep.
of coins.
Yeah. I think people love pronouncing the death of specific trends. And, if you call it right, you maybe get some notoriety, but there's no penalty for calling it wrong. So, you even have people like Vitalik saying that the future will be cross-chain, but not multi-chain. No, he said it would be multi-chain, but not cross-chain, which again, I think is completely head in the sand. People want these cross-chain assets very badly. People want Ether on Solana very badly. And if you, like step back from our preconceptions for a second, there's really no difference between Ether on Solana and USDC on Ethereum or WBTC on Ethereum. Those are exactly the same security model. There's a group of signers that have custody of everything. And as we know, USDC, Tether, WBTC, those are worth billions and billions of dollars. And USDT, user demand for Tether predates user demand for Ethereum by quite a while. So the idea that the future is going to be multi-chain but not cross-chain just ignores the expressed preferences of users over the last 8 to 10 years. Users want representations of off-chain assets or assets from other chains. And those will never go away, and that will continue to be the case for decades more.
Absolutely. So let's say in another 5 to 10 years, how do you imagine this ecosystem evolving? Is it going to be so sophisticated such that to the user, the underlying chains are so properly abstracted away such that any single chain is really just a means to an end, really?
Um, I don't know that we can reach that point because users care about liquidity. Usually, I'm using a blockchain for some like purpose. I'm moving money around or buying an NFT or something. And when I'm moving money around, I want to be on the chain with the best liquidity, the deepest AMM pools, the biggest lending markets. And liquidity is very localized. You can't just spread it all out over the entire ecosystem. That'll make it worse for everybody. Liquidity wants to be aggregated in the same place. So I suspect that there will be a relatively small number of chains with deep liquidity pools. And users are going to be, overall abstracted from where they are, but they're still going to need to worry about, am I getting the best rate for my transaction? And that's going to make them worry about specific chains. Every cross-chain communication has some amount of latency involved that's not present in a single chain communication. And that means that cross-chain comms have worse MEV than single-chain comms. And that, when you commit to a 5-chain transaction that goes off, it takes some time. You're going to get a worse execution price and things might fail halfway through. So I still suspect that liquidity and execution price and best interest rates are going to cause a lot of aggregation in the future. But we will see, tons and tons of chains on the periphery of this liquidity ecosystem where normal users are quite often.
I would love it if you could expound on cross-chain MEV being even worse in this paradigm than it is currently in just one chain.
Yeah, I gave a talk about this at MEV Day in Amsterdam last week, and I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version, which is that when you send a cross-chain message, you have to make a transaction on the first chain, it has to go on chain on the first chain, it has to be confirmed. There's a finality wait, and then someone off chain has to see it, make a new transaction, broadcast that to the second chain, and then wait for that to be confirmed on the second chain. So there's always, always, always 2 transactions or more for a cross-chain transaction. And that means that there's 2 points where a transaction is in the mempool and can be manipulated, that MEV can be extracted. However, there's also a wait where the second transaction has not yet been sent, but everybody knows what it will be. And so there is actually a third point where MEV can be extracted after it's been included on the first chain, but before it's even been broadcast to the second chain. So contrary to intuition, rather than being twice as bad, it's 3 times as bad. Because there is this third period of latency where the transaction's been committed on Ethereum but hasn't been sent to EVMos yet. Yeah. And like, there's just not much we can really do about that. All of the same tricks for minimizing MEV can be applied, but because you're minimizing it 3 times instead of 1, it's just like there's overhead. So this is why we believe that users will move assets across chains, but we don't believe that there will be cross-chain dexes. Users will use a dex locally on a single chain and then move assets, or vice, opposite order, move the assets, then use the dex. We don't think that there's going to be these big cross-chain liquidity pools that are homed on multiple chains at once. We think that liquidity is going to aggregate to specific chain environments where it can operate in synchronous smart contracts.
Sure, absolutely. And, as we've observed, everything in nature kind of concentrates, right? It
Network
inevitably, centralizes over time. Even though, initially there's a Cambrian explosion of different competitors. And then over time, 1 or 2, 3 big ones emerge. And those are where everything concentrates. And in this case, liquidity. So that being said, so it does sound like at any point, if we're moving cross-chain, the only good thing about using bridges is really just to transfer value first to an AMM, for example, like osmosis, to then create swaps, right? So that you're not subjecting yourself to MEV.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot like applications on existing chains have different levels of MEV. Cross-chain applications are going to have different levels of MEV. So some of them, like cross-chain AMMs, are probably way too much MEV to be practical. But some things like cross-chain lending markets maybe could work. I think that there's a lot of middle that remains to be seen. So we're going to have to experiment a bunch in this cross-chain application design space to see which things are viable as cross-chain applications and which things should be done as single-chain applications only.
Mm-hmm. Well, so it sounds like within the cross-chain paradigm, the attack surface just gets 3 times as large at minimum. So why would a cross-chain lending market be more practical than a cross-chain AMM?
Cross-chain AMMs have very easy MEV. Their MEV is predicated on the current market rate of the asset, which is relatively easy for MEV searchers to know. And the way AMMs are structured, they know exactly how far they can push the market rate so that they extract value from you, so that they take some of the tokens you would have gotten from your trade execution. With lending markets, it's not quite as easy to directly monetize. You have to predict a little bit more about the rates. You have to predict a little bit more about what the market is going to do. So the question kind of becomes for a given application, how much MEV does it naturally generate, and how easy is it to extract that value? We don't know the threshold there about, we don't know the threshold where apps become impractical, but we can pretty confidently say that AMMs are beyond that threshold, and other than that, we don't really know where apps are going to land. Are they going to be practical in the cross-chain environment, or are they not? Real quick, I'm going to turn on the light because it is getting dark here. There we go, much brighter.
Okay, sorry. Okay, great, perfect. Now, let's go back to the hacks, and I want to talk about Wormhole. How was that done, and how does Nomad mitigate the same exploit that was done to it?
Yeah. I've also given a talk about bridge hacks and their mechanisms. I gave one at ListCon, which covered Thorchain and Poly Network. I gave a brief version of that at ETH Denver as well, counting, again, Thorchain and Poly Network. So the thing that Thorchain, Poly Network, and Wormhole share is that the issue is in the implementation of the bridge, in the code that manages like minting and burning tokens or dispatching messages to applications, not in the code that actually moves things across chains. That all worked perfectly for those three systems. So for Wormhole, there was a bug in the Solana smart contracts that allowed a user to, essentially like forge validator signatures, or to pass off invalid signatures as valid validator signatures. This is, like difficult to explain because Solana is a bit of a weird ecosystem. But it allowed the attacker to convince the application that the message was valid without the message ever having been sent. So it's like walking into the bank with a forged check and taking all of the money in the bank. It is kind of incredible that they were able to pull together funds to make everybody whole from that. But the way we recommend addressing this is through latency and financial controls. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier with permission versus revocation. In Wormhole, because it's permission-based, whatever the validators sign off on happens just immediately. Like as soon as they sign off, anyone can go to chain and make that happen immediately. And so if you can forge the validator's signature or pass off bad signatures, whatever you want to do just happens like immediately. And it's irrevocable, it's on chain, you no longer have to deal with anything, like that ether is yours now. In the Nomad model, what we recommend is, because we have this latency period, there is a certain amount of waiting time before the message can be processed to allow for revocation. Because we have this window, anything that you see going wrong with the application, you can shut down the application before it happens. So in Nomad, essentially what we recommend is to have circuit breakers on the bridge. An obvious circuit breaker is someone taking all of the money? If someone's taking all of the money, turn off the bridge. So because we have this time window between the action being put on chain and the on-chain action being executed, it allows us to protect users from things like bad validator signatures. Separating the commitment from the execution is important here. And a bridge cannot do that without introducing some latency period.
So, right, in your bank example, it's like the bad guy comes in with a forged check and then drains the entire reserve of that bank. And typically, with most bridges, the attack model, the attack vector that they are concerned with is the idea that the bankers, the bank management may run off with your money, but empirically, we have not observed that, and that's not actually a practical attack vector that we should be concerned with. It's someone external. Yeah.
Yeah, you can kind of look at, there's two different classifications of bridge hack. Most of them are that there's some external bad actor who has taken advantage of a hole in the bank security to just grab all the money and run. The other classification is root of trust issues, which is what happened to Ronen and their $600 million hack. And that's when somebody actually compromises the bank itself, like an employee of the bank decides to, or a group of employees of the bank decides to run off with all the money. In the first one, where it's just an application issue, forged checks, whatever, that's because the bank's procedures were wrong. In the second case, like Ronen, it's because the bank itself, failed.
Yeah, and in Nomad's model, it's the revocation period gives your bankers time to call the police.
Yeah, in the Nomad model, all of the money's in the vault, and the vault has a time lock on it. So you just can't open that vault for 30 minutes at all. And that 30 minutes gives everyone watching, every observer, an opportunity to, point out fraud, to cause someone to get slashed, to take whatever action they think is appropriate. For example, if you think the vault's going to get robbed, you might want to sell your coins. You have 30 minutes to do that. And the bank administrators, like the CEO or whatever of this bank, has that 30 minutes to just tell the vault not to open, to call off this theft before it occurs. Whereas with the multi-sig model, like your Thorchains, your Axelars, your wormholes, these thefts happen because the vault door is just standing open and any bank employee can go in there at any time. There is no mandatory time lag.
Right. Can you help me understand? So Nomad is not a multi-sig, but rather validator based?
Nomad is not equivalent to a multi-sig. We have a few differences because we're in this optimistic model. Like a multi-sig or a validator multi-sig, like a proof of stake selected multi-sig, we use off-chain actors to do the verification rather than executing it all on chain like IBC does. In the IBC model, each chain is following the other chain's proof of stake consensus, and so you can't really fool around with what happened on the other chain. That's really complex and expensive. And again, we want to be a fast scout, not IBC. So unless you're doing IBC, your only choice is to do these off-chain actor, like validated, locally checked bridges. So in a sense, like Nomad, Axelar, Wormhole all fall into that category because we're not IBC. There's IBC and there's everything else. Our argument is essentially that we're building the best thing you can build without being IBC.
So the off-chain signers, what prevents them from running away with the money again? Back to the, I guess, compromised bank administrator attack vector.
Yeah.
Are they putting up collateral or something?
So in the long run, there will be collateral so that there's something to slash if malicious action happens. This is more of a disincentive than anything else. The thing that prevents it is the people who can, shut down the vault, who can tell it, don't open, who can revoke permission, revoke access. So this, again, goes back to the difference between permission-based systems and revocation-based systems. In the multi-sig model, or the proof-of-stake chosen multi-sig model like Axelar, whatever the validator sign is the objective truth. In the Nomad model, there is this same, like validator signing something, but everybody is watching, checking that it is correct, and has the ability to revoke its access if it's incorrect. So we kind of flip the script. We're not a multi-sig. We don't reduce to a multi-sig, and we get a bunch of nice benefits out of that. In exchange for a little bit of latency, you get the ability to proactively defend from application issues and thefts. You get the, it's really cheap to operate and simple to build, easy to reason about. You can expand out and have a bunch of people with the ability to revoke access. So it's very safe. And we believe that this is a better bridge model than these multi-sigs. So for a very concrete example, if you look at the Ronen hack, $600 million, apparently taken by North Korea, that occurred because they lost 5 of their 9 keys. Outside actors compromised 5 keys in their multi-sig. And that was enough to just, take all of the money because they were in a permission-based system. As soon as the attackers had those 5 keys, they had permission to do whatever they wanted, immediately with no oversight. In Nomad, even if 100% of the keys of this, 100% of the trusted keys or permissioned keys are stolen, attackers still can't steal the money. As long as one honest party still has a copy of their key, they can shut down the channel and prevent theft. So in that way, Nomad fails safe in the case of key theft. And that's because it's based on revocation, not permission.
Very interested in the North Korea bit. Where has that been confirmed, or is it speculation? What's the story behind that?
I believe the State Department confirmed that. Like, you're going to want to go read up on this because it's absolutely wild. But I believe that the U.S. State Department confirmed that.
Okay, so all right. Well, I actually have not heard of the Ronen hack, so would love to get the story behind that. So Ronen was
So Ronen
an app.
is Ronen was Axie Infinity's official side chain. Connected to Ethereum by this 5 of 9 validator-based, multi-sig. So it secured all of the ETH and other things that are on this Ronen side chain. And we still don't have too many of the details on this because Axie Infinity has not posted a full post-mortem. But essentially what we know is that 5 out of the 9 keys were compromised. Somebody gained access to Axie servers or other computers that had these keys or had control of these keys and were able to use them to drain all of the funds in the bridge. $600 million in Ether and other tokens, give or take. And Ronen is really notable for being the only time the root of trust has been compromised in a bridge. It is the only time that somebody has stolen the multi-sig keys that we know of. All of the other bridge hacks have had, honest root of trust, like correctly operating root of trust, and have been broken by the implementation, like the glue and scaffolding around that root of trust.
Okay, so let me just wrap my head around that, because so it typically is almost unthinkable for the root of trust to be compromised in such a way. What would they have had to do? Because for an attacker to steal someone's keys, they need to know your identity, right? They would know who owns this key, and therefore I would do a targeted attack on whatever hardware that I think that they're using. So therefore, for Ronin, I guess it was known who these people were, and somehow they got their keys stolen. Or how else would they have gained access to their keys?
So, excuse me. It's still really unclear what happened, how those keys were secured in the first place, and what the chain of events was that led to their compromise. Most of what Axie has said is that a server or group of servers was accessed by an outside party.
Oh, they must
and
have stored their keys in those servers.
or control over the keys. So we still don't know, like, what was their custody setup, how many keys were on any given server, were they in like an HSM, were they in like AWS KMS? We really don't know what the setup was for those 5 keys. And Axie is not exactly forthcoming with that information. So
probably because it's embarrassing to disclose.
that may be the case.
Yeah, right. Because we like left really important keys on a hot wallet, basically on the internet, on the cloud.
I would be, really upset were that the case, but also not very surprised. The bigger point to make here is that for Wormhole and Thorchain and Poly Network, these were like very crypto attacks. Is like they were bad smart contract code, or they were bad chain parsing for Thorchain, or bad signature verification for Wormhole. They were very much about the on-chain code and how it was written and the mistakes that were made implementing the smart contracts. Ronen was a very traditional security hack. Whatever this team did, they did it, on internet security, not smart contract security. They compromised servers. They maybe stole SSH keys. They didn't, like break smart contracts. And this is really interesting because there are really a lot of qualified traditional computer security professionals out there in the world. So we probably need to have in crypto and in bridges very high standards for traditional computer security. Otherwise, we're going to see more of these because there are hundreds of thousands of traditional security professionals out there. Maybe 10 times more than there are smart contract security professionals. There are many more people qualified to execute, the Ronin style attacks, people who are outside of crypto.
Right. I guess I took it for granted that people in crypto would have already gotten down the traditional security aspect, like down on lock. And that's by virtue of having secured their own keys and being their own banks and then some, right? So just the fact that something was not traditionally secured in in a crypto app is sort of telling of the sophistication of the team. Right? Do you know where Axie Infinity came from?
I don't know a lot about them personally, but I will say that securing servers is hard. It's something that a amateur coming into this will not know a whole lot about, and doing it in a enterprise, like friendly, maintainable, documentable way is really difficult and takes a lot of work. So I'm reluctant to like shit on the Axie team. But I will say that I think everybody in this space, running oracles, running bridges, running any permissioned smart contract system, needs to take this very seriously, because this is one of the first of its kind attacks on a production DeFi system, where it was compromised by pwning the servers running it rather than the smart contracts running it.
Right. And in that case, you really can't argue that code is law, and you can't say that, well, the exploiter actually did what was prescribed in the protocol, and therefore it's all fine, right? It's all fine and dandy.
I feel like you have to draw the code is law line somewhere. In some sense, like, you were running code on the server that allowed this. So, but my take,
and what of economic attacks? And I use the word attack very loosely. So very in recent memory this year. So what I'm referencing is the Juno Prop 16, right? So the contention was around one large whale basically exploiting their airdrop game. Is that protocol prescribed and therefore completely fair game, or is it completely right of the community to say, well, no, they cheated, therefore we get to revoke their coins?
One of the things I like about blockchains is that what they do is they automate the social consensus. Everybody agrees to this set of rules, and then the blockchain goes and automates those and makes it really easy for it to just keep going the way it is for a long, long time. I think that it's probably pretty reasonable for the people who put that social consensus there in the first place, and the people who are working in it right now, and the people who have a financial interest in it, to continue exercising some control over the social consensus rules. I think we definitely see that through governance, through hard forks, through soft forks, through things like ETH2, the beacon chain, and the merge. Like, these are living social consensus automation devices. They're not static, they're not dead, they're not Bitcoin. These are ongoing social processes, and personally, I'm fine with the will of the community making changes to it. I think that we don't have as good tooling to measure and enact the will of the social consensus as we should. Like, all of the mechanisms we have, like coin voting, are very like fuzzy, like lossy representations of what the social process, the community actually wants. But it's hard to design something better.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. The thing that I was talking to you about in DM is the fact that ETH as an ether, ETH1, is different from an ETH2 staking token. They would be, well, I didn't explicitly say this to you, but that was where I was going with my question. So, I was thinking that, okay, well, if I'm an ETH holder you know, I shouldn't non-critically just go with staking my ETH just to earn ETH2 rewards, because the two are completely distinct, and it's a one-way train, and I can't, you know, once I stake and get onto ETH2, it's not like it's reversible.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think that's really important to understand, especially right now as the merge, approaches later this year. Is ETH and ETH2 are not the same thing yet, and they won't be for quite a while. Even after the merge happens, it will still be a one-way trip until some future unspecified hard fork makes it a two-way road. We don't know how long that's going to take. So I think it's definitely correct to say that users shouldn't, like blindly ape into ETH2 to earn that 4% or 4.5% or whatever it is right now.
Yeah, because the value in ETH is underpinned by the proof of work of the ETH1 blockchain.
I mean, it really depends on how you look at it. You could say that the value of ETH is underpinned by people's faith in the future of ETH.
As well, yeah.
Yeah, as well. And I think as you move towards proof of stake, that's more and more the case. Like it becomes much easier to argue that case and much harder to argue, like proof of work imbued, like theory of value. So people have a great deal of faith that ETH2 will eventually be redeemable for ETH1. And in the meantime, they have services like Lido providing liquidity on staked ETH2 to smooth over that gap between ETH1 and ETH2 while it comes out. This is something that I wrote a lot about back in 2019. Right, wow, it's been so many years. The difference between ETH and staked ETH that can't be unstaked or transferred or moved. So back in the day, I called it BETH for Beacon ETH. And yeah, I know it's ironic that you say ETH and Beth, but like that's just how I do it. So
Well, we've got Beth and Peggy, so they could be friends.
Beth and Peggy. So we kind of live in this world where there are a few different flavors of tokenized Beacon ETH or central exchange provided markets for Beacon ETH. And we see exactly what we predicted back in 2019, years and years ago, is that the Beacon ETH trades at a discount to ETH. Even with the staking returns, even though you're earning 4% a year, it still trades at a discount. And that's because it's not liquid and it's not ETH.
Yeah, it's that, that 4% APY is kind of a subsidy for the notionally lower value you would get from just hodling ether. And really the two, Beacon ETH and ETH should be treated differently, like by virtue of the fact that like ETH1 is sort of the token that is native to the ETH1 chain, and ETH2, which is a completely distinct chain, which is basically it's not different than any other layer 2 at this point. Doesn't host all of the applications that is hosted and secured on the ETH1 chain.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the distinction.
Exactly. Is right now you can't use the same wallets, you can't use the same keys, you can't use the same software, you can't use the same addresses for ETH1 and ETH2. They're completely separate. Later this year in the merge, it will become the same chain at least, but it will still not be the same asset because there won't be two-way exchange. And that won't happen. You can't like unbond your ETH2 until a future hard fork, hopefully next year.
Right. And so ETH2 staking has the longest unbonding period of any staking token in existence.
Right. And
which
that
is
the
would be to
unbonding period
perpetuity.
is a question mark.
Right.
now.
It's
Yeah.
like it's not 2 weeks like in Cosmos. It's who knows. Trust the process.
Yep. And it's really cool to see a market spring up, like we predicted years ago, a market spring up to address that. Is Lido is the leader in this market with Steph staked ETH, a tokenized right to the future the future proceeds once ETH and ETH2 are the same asset.
Yeah. So help me understand Lido. I know we're going a little bit off topic, but this is a really interesting topic for me personally. So with Lido, what's the business model? Because their contract or whatever, are they a custodian or a smart contract?
It's a little complex right now. And they are moving in a kind of progressively decentralized fashion.
Okay, so they're a custodian.
Well, they actually coordinate many different validators. So they coordinate a whole bunch of people who are actually running, these ETH2 validators. So when you put your ETH into Lido, they handle connecting that Ether to the people who are actually running the software. And they handle putting an abstraction layer over that, so you don't have to worry as much about which specific validators are, in charge of your ETH right now. You should.
So it's kind of like
go,
a delegated proof of stake model.
It's kind of attempting to patch a delegated proof of stake model onto the current weird ETH1 beacon chain separation. So what they issue you is essentially a token, Steph, which gives you the right to sometime in the future, after the merge and after this future hard fork and after the upgrades to Lido that allow this, sometime in the future you will be able to get Ether back in exchange for Steph. At a 1-to-1 rate, ideally, if everything goes correctly and there's no major mishaps. And in order to accomplish this, they're coordinating many different validators and helping manage a lot of ETH.
Well, in the meantime, where does the Ether go?
So on ETH1, it's transferred to a smart contract
And locked up there.
A smart contract that essentially permanently burns it. There's no way to get it out of that smart contract now. The ETH2 deposit contract. And so any Ether that goes into this contract is issued on the beacon chain when the validators on the beacon chain see that deposit. And that's how ETH is moved from ETH1 to the beacon chain today, is by essentially burning it on ETH1. So you can kind of think of it as a one-way bridge, right? Where the ETH2 validators are running a one-way bridge from ETH1 to the beacon chain right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We actually borrowed some of that code for Nomad because it was a really good Merkle tree implementation.
Oh, very nice. So yeah, that actually just highlights one of the reasons why I personally wouldn't necessarily use this, because from my point of view, Ether, right, is kind of a reserve asset at this point. It's just like the most deeply liquid cryptocurrency, second to Bitcoin, obviously. So, and it's going to take ETH2 beacon chain token Beth several years to catch up to that status, if it does. I'm sure it will, because the community is just following the headwinds towards that direction so strongly. but it might take
Yep.
a while to get there.
So a couple of things is like we are seeing really good pickup on DeFi adoption of Steph. So like Lido staked ETH in Maker, for example, as collateral. And going back to talking about bridges for a second, one of the invariants that we want a bridge to have is that across all connected blockchains, the circulating supply stays constant. So for every ETH issued on Solana, we want one ETH taken out of circulation on Ethereum. For every ETH
Sure, it has
issued
to for
on,
accounting.
yeah, exactly. We want
Otherwise,
the
you're
accounting to
equivocating.
balance.
Yeah.
You don't want to. Anyway, so this is a very measurable relationship. Like you can look at the ETH in the deposit contract and the ETH in the beacon chain and say that those are equivalent plus the inflation from the beacon chain. You can look at the ETH in the wormhole bridge and check that wormhole has not issued any additional ETH above that amount on other chains. You can look at the USDC and Nomad bridge and check that it is equal to the amount of Nomad USDC on other chains. This is a great property to have because everything is public, published on blockchains, visible. You can actually go out and check the integrity of bridges yourself. And so we absolutely love this because it gives us easy circuit breakers for Nomad Bridge. At Equilibrium, once we have all of the software written, there will be active checks on every bridge transfer that it doesn't break this relationship, that it doesn't break the bridge accounting. And because we have a revocation-based model, we can actually go out and prevent anything that would break the accounting. We can prevent the bridge causing inflation. And that right there, that relatively simple check would have prevented the Thorchain hack, the wormhole hack, the polymarket hack, would have prevented a lot of these bridge breaks in the past. And it's something that you can do with revocation that you can't necessarily do with permission.
So what happens to the tokens on the source chain? So let's say in transit to the destination chain, an attack occurs, but Nomad catches it and the circuit breaks.
Yep.
So on the source chain are the users that have sent the ETH, for example. Are they made whole on the source chain, or has it been burned already? What's the sequence of events?
Yeah. So because Nomad and all of these other bridges are not official Ethereum Foundation projects, we can't just mint and burn Ether on demand. So we have to escrow that Ether on Ethereum and then send off the message to the other chain that there's been some escrowed and they want to move it over there. So if an issue happens in flight, the answer for every bridge from Wormhole, Axelar, Nomad, IBC is that humans have to figure out what happened and start a manual recovery process. IBC has really good governance and tooling around this, restarting old channels. They're actually invoking that for the EVMos IBC channels right now, given the EVMos halt and restart recently. So the answer, what happens if something goes wrong, is always humans have to intervene and clean up. And that is always true of any bridge that can be built.
Sure, yeah. With Wormhole, the humans at Jump Trading intervened and made everybody whole with their funds are safe money.
With a big injection of cash. Hopefully, the purpose of Nomad is to make it so that we revoke permission, we prevent the loss from happening, and then we don't need a giant influx of cash in order to make people whole, because nobody lost money in an irrevocable way.
So the question is, the funds that are in escrow, do they get returned to the users?
Most likely what would happen in a manual cleanup for Nomad or for any other like bridge going through this is that every message that was honest eventually reaches its destination. So like when we're going through the cleanup process, we make sure that those people who sent funds receive those funds where they intended to get them in the first place.
Okay, understood. All right. So that being said, you mentioned that in the future there's going to be stake involved, right? On Nomad, such that validators would have to collateralize and get slash if they equivocate. So does that mean in the foreseeable future there's going to be some native tokens involved? You know, how is that introduced without a blockchain? Or I guess it could be introduced with the smart contract.
Right, again, like Nomad is an execution layer only thing, right? We're working only at the smart contract layer. So we can introduce that at the smart contract layer on each chain. And the way we do that is essentially that each chain knows the state of its communication channel. It knows what's correct. And the smart contracts can check if an incorrect attestation was signed. So each smart contract can slash someone who tries to falsify outgoing messages. So that's where we implement slashing, is at the smart contract layer where the messages are being sent from.
So in the future, when you integrate other non-EVM Cosmos blockchains, if you do, how would you support that if they don't have smart contracts? Or I guess, if they have Cosmosm enabled, then you could do that if you support Rust, right?
Yep. We love Rust. We are a huge Rust shop. We write everything we possibly can in Rust. So yeah, we would try to target Cosmosm wherever possible. We've already done some experiments here. One of our engineers has done some like experimental core protocol in Cosmosm a few months back. So we would try to implement the Cosmosm contracts just the same as the Solidity contracts, allowing for the differences in things like gas and calling semantics and RPC and all of that for Cosmosm. And we would try to do the same for Near's WASM VM or for Solana, either Neon or the BPF VM, or maybe write a substrate palette. We feel like the world is our oyster here. We love writing Rust, and everybody is got Rust support these days.
Right. So yeah, you mentioned Substrate and other protocols. What's concretely on your roadmap in the near term?
Our concrete roadmap is about finishing off the protocol, getting it to the point where we are happy with it, and we have fully implemented the security model. Like everything out there, this is a series of progressive steps. We think it's pretty good right now, but we want to get it to the point where we can, point it and say this is great. So, a lot of our concrete roadmap is and a lot of our concrete roadmap is getting it to a point where we can say it's great and provide a in-depth formal explanation of why we built it that way. I love having these like ad hoc conversations about it, but I really want to have a written down, very concrete protocol specification and design document. Outside of protocol, we're focused on deploying this to as many places as possible, adding chains very quickly right now. We have an engineer who has basically been doing that nonstop all week. And so while I'm not going to tell you all of the places we've deployed, you might be able to figure it out if you look hard enough at different chains.
I mean, just from the outside, we could see that you're supporting EVMos, Moonbeam, and Ethereum. And there's another one, Metrodome. Sorry?
Milkomeda.
Cometa. What is that?
That is a Cardano rollup, essentially.
Cardano.
An EVM chain based on Cardano, settling to Cardano.
Okay, and why that chain rollup?
We are really excited about reaching as many communities as possible. So they have a really strong EVM. We had basically no issues deploying there. So we decided that reaching out and planting a foot down in a new ecosystem was a great thing to be doing, and we are doing that as many places as we possibly can.
Understood. Yeah, I thought to this point you still can launch smart contracts on Cardano, but maybe that has changed as of this recently.
This is a whole I don't want to get into the Cardano smart contract debate, especially with my background in UTXOs and UTXO based smart contracts. There's really a lot to be said. We could do a whole other 5-hour podcast on it sometime.
Yeah, I don't even know how you would do that with smart contracting logic for UTXOs. It's just so it's a high state. It's very high state.
Yes,
That's the
it's
best
very
word for
high
it.
state.
Okay.
You just got to turn your brain inside out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, yeah, thank you, James. That was just one of the most informative interviews I've done. I think the other one that was really great in recent memory was one with Rick Dudley. And so, I think between the two of you, our listeners get a really full picture of what's going on in the Ethereum world. And yeah, you guys seem to have both foots in the door on Ethereum and Cosmos.
Well, again, I've been doing cross-chain development for 5 years.
Yeah.
I do it because I really love exploring these ecosystems, seeing how it's all put together, writing code for each of them, and I want to be more involved in each community, each ecosystem. I don't want to be confining myself to Ethereum.
Yeah. So I mean, how did you come to be working on cross chain for the last 5 years before anyone was concerned with it, and during the time when everybody thought that Ethereum was going to be the canonical app store for everything?
Well, I think it's really easy to see that you can't have a canonical app store for everything. And all of the people who thought that back in 2017 were really just not looking at blockchains very hard. It's just objectively not a good opinion if you just look at how a blockchain works. There have to be more than one of these for them to scale up to users, to any significant amount of users. But for my personal journey, I started in crypto before Ethereum existed. Very early on in Ethereum's life cycle, it was clear that this was going to be interesting and big. I've been writing Solidity for as long as Solidity has existed, essentially. In 2017, I got really interested in atomic swaps, which were the only really known cross-chain
Yeah, that was the
construction
conversation back then. Yeah.
That was the state of things. And you kind of look at them and you say, these take 3 hours to do, and the user has to be online the entire time. And there's a free option problem, and there's second funder griefing, and you have to have a specialized wallet. And I really feel like you could just do better. You look at this and you say, oh, cool, that's neat in theory. There's a proof of concept cross-chain transaction. We know we can build things cross-chain and that we can have the chains enforce it. So what's the ideal way to do that? How can we improve on the state of the art? And so back in 2017 and 2018, we spent a lot of time improving atomic swaps, making better versions. And eventually we just decided that there is no amount of improvement that will make an atomic swap good. And we moved on to focusing on proof of work relays and SPV work and other relatively high state complex cross-chain projects. We contributed a ton of code to TBTC, for example, which has a collateralized multi-sig holding Bitcoin and issuing a tokenized Bitcoin. So you're actually using a Bitcoin relay running Bitcoin's proof of work in Solidity to manage Bitcoin UTXOs that back TBTC one-to-one. So we wrote a lot of things like that are relatively high state. They're based on verifying the remote chain's consensus process the same way IBC is. We focused on Bitcoin because it was relatively cheap to run a Bitcoin relay compared to relays for other chains. That said, it does still cost 5 to 6 figures in gas every month to keep the Bitcoin relay up to date. It's quite a significant expense. And IBC essentially gets to cheat here by having the IBC module pay no gas on whatever chain is running it. So IBC gets subsidized by the validator set and doesn't have to pay for the expense of operating its relays, which is a really great place to be. Unfortunately, that's not something we can achieve on Ethereum. You can't have Ethereum subsidize these chain relays the same way IBC chains choose to participate in subsidizing IBC. So we stopped prioritizing building relays altogether because the vast majority of the time, a chain's not going to have IBC. They're not going to choose to subsidize IBC connections in the way that IBC requires. And we feel like we should be able to build something that is sufficient and be able to build it in a modular way so that we can use IBC whenever it becomes available on chains that we're connected to. So that's why we started working on Nomad, is because we feel like there's this gap in the market between IBC, which is incredible, and the multi-sigs and like Axelar style multi-sigs that we think have a deficient security model. We think are deficient in practice rather than in theory.
Right, and that tends to be the pitfalls that a lot of mechanism designers kind of fall into, unfortunately, which is, a lot of things that are theoretically sound can in practice not, be practical.
Yep. We built Nomad focusing on lowest cost of operation, lowest cost of implementation. You have these proof of stake chains giving out 8 figures per month in inflation to operate this bridge. I think that's a completely unnecessary amount of money for what's actually a relatively simple application.
Right. So I mean, so speaking of IBC, I've been asked about how IBC would be compatible with, ETH2 like clients in the future, and the answer is, at the current phase, it's not. But in the future, when ETH2 eventually moves towards a BFT consensus, then it would, right? But you know better than I do about what their roadmap is. And so I guess the question would be, how far into the future, and what are the what's the roadmap for ETH2 going to look like when they do eventually switch consensus? Because they're going to start with Casper, which is their right. They're going to start with Nakamoto consensus and eventually move towards a PBFT model.
So,
how many years in between is that?
I wouldn't hold your breath.
Okay.
This is really just not even close to being decided or specified, or it looks like it will be Casper for the foreseeable future.
Okay, right.
And one like point to be made is that subsidization by the consensus layer is a critical element of IBC connectivity. If you have to implement IBC in Solidity, you'll pay astronomical amounts of gas to keep it running, keep it up to date, and process messages over it. The fact that IBC doesn't have to pay gas within the Cosmos ecosystem is incredible and is a huge advantage of Cosmos. But Ethereum is not going to consent to subsidizing IBC relays for a bunch of Cosmos chains. That will never be in their roadmap. It will never be politically viable to make special Ethereum protocol rules that favor IBC.
Damn. So in the interim, what do you anticipate that Nomad would bridge that gap?
We are already bridging that gap. We are live on EVMos, connected to Ethereum and moving money over right now.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. And doing so in a cheap way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. That being said, James Prestwich, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been extremely informative to have you speak about Ethereum bridging in general and all of the high-profile bridge hacks. Thank you to our listeners of Interchain FM and Brian Luke for helping me produce these shows. We are going to come back on next week to talk to another bridge, which is Crescent. And if you don't know, Crescent was rebranded from Gravity Dex. Sorry, they're not a bridge. I'm sorry. Decoupling Gravity Dex from Gravity Bridge, we're talking to the Gravity Dex people, which is Crescent, and that is built by B Harvest. They're the core contributors that were acquired by Tendermint, now Ignite. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next week. Bye y'all.